I think, Tom, if you take if you study history and you look around the world, not just your own little bubble like a lot of people do, you can see there is a march toward oligarchies throughout the world. You know, there are so many places that are turning to right-wing politicians, and I'd like to know who's funding all this, because this is, and if you listen, they're all using the same playbook. It's the immigrants, it's the border, it's the gays, and if you go back and you look at Nazi propaganda, you give people somebody to blame. You're not a billionaire like Trump. You're not a billionaire like Putin. You're not super rich. You know whose fault it is? It's those immigrants. It's those gay people. It's those transgender people. And we all know who, if you're smart, you know it's the corporations who took your job and sent it to India or China or Vietnam or Mexico so they could pay somebody pennies on the dollar. That's what really happened. But they give somebody to blame, and there are lots of people in America and around the world that aren't doing that great. And if they've got somebody to blame, then they don't have to look at themselves and go, well, maybe I should have got a skilled trade. Maybe I should have got a degree and got a better job. But it seems like, I hate to say conspiracy, but it seems like it's happening everywhere. And for it all to happen at one time, I can't say it's organic. It just didn't spring up. And the fact that they're all using the same talking points, and people tend to ignore it, because I'm wondering, too, you know, most corporations own the media, and I think a lot of stuff, we're not getting this panic button going. And I look around. And
I get what you're saying, Anthony. I think there's two factors at work here. The first is that billionaires around the world, or at least in many countries, have figured out that American billionaires have learned how to game the system. Now, in part, this is because the Supreme Court legalized political bribery, which is not the case in most other countries. But you know, they're looking at the success of, you know, the average American billionaire right now pays 3.4% in income taxes. You know, most people pay, you know, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30%, you know, depending on their income. And so, you know, billionaires around the world are working on that kind of thing. So there's that kind of funding of a right-wing movement. And the right-wing movement always embraces the billionaires. But I think the larger issue is that when the bread crisis was happening across the northern part of Africa, this was the result of climate change. The desert had moved 100 miles south in Syria and wiped out millions of farmers, or hundreds of thousands of farmers. And so they all ended up in Damascus and Aleppo, you know, in the major cities, you know, as homeless people, basically. And they started demanding food and a place to live. And Assad's response to that was to send the soldiers into the streets and shoot protesters. And that then led to riots in the cities. So what happened was over 1 million, and some argue over 2 million, dark-skinned Muslim Syrians fled North Africa. Many of them went through Libya, you know, got on boats, went to southern Italy and Greece, and then spread throughout Europe. Germany took in 1 million of them. I mean, 1 million, and embraced them. This was Angela Merkel. Sweden took in several 100,000, which was the equivalent of more than 1 million when you proportion it to population. And what has happened now is that because of local discrimination, local old boy networks, people tend to hire people who they know, right? People who they feel comfortable with. And so these immigrants in Europe have not been able to get good jobs. They're very upset about it. Many of them have turned to crime. They've been essentially ghettoized. And so now there's this massive right-wing backlash, and it's happening this happened in England, it's happening in France, and that right-wing, that really it's a white nationalist, it's a white supremacist backlash, or our tribe versus your tribe backlash. I mean, there's different ways to characterize it that are more or less, you know, evil or benign. But that's what's really driving this process was, you know, had Putin never destroyed Syria, had that flood of refugees never arrived on the southern border. That's how Viktor Orban rose to power, is in 2010. His campaign promise, this was, at that time, there was just it was mostly Libyan refugees. This was, you know, after we killed Gaddafi. It was, you know, oh my God, here come the refugees. You know, it's a challenge, and it's a game that Republicans in the United States are playing too. Although Biden now has pretty much sealed up the southern border, you wouldn't know that from watching Fox News, but that's pretty much what's going on. But I get it, Anthony. I don't have any easy answer other than identifying the problem. But thank you for the call.